This is about gluten, and there's nothing to buy, which is good. There's no sales pitch, it's just information. So, gluten, we'll get into some things that might be a little bit more technical, some things that are probably less technical. So, if anybody has any questions, stop me anytime, and we'll meet you where you live, and we'll figure out what you need to know, and we'll go from there. So, start off with gluten. What's the big deal? Everybody's heard a lot about gluten, right? Gluten this, gluten that, gluten this, gluten that. Well, what is the big deal? I don't even know what I put in here. Why is gluten different today? I've heard a lot of discussions and arguments, and so what I want to do is kind of counter some of the things that I've heard. Like, you know, we've been eating bread for thousands of years, so what's the big deal? Why is it all of a sudden something big? Why is it all, is this new? Are we getting sicker? What's going on? So, Norman Borlaug, actually, it'll say here in the 70s, but it wasn't in the 70s, it was more in the 40s and 50s, changed the grain as we know it. So the grain we eat today has been crossbred and hybridized so many times that its molecular structure is nothing like its original form. It's got twice as many chromosomes as it had before. So it's not like getting blue eyes from brown eyes. It's like we have 23 chromosomes, and now we have 46. Or we have 46 chromosomes, and now we have 92. It's a completely different thing. It's not like saying we're changing the structure as we know it. It's an entirely new structure. It's something completely new. It may look the same, but it's like having, if I had 4 eyes and 4 ears and 8 arms, well, you kind of look like a human, so we're just going to call it a human. It's completely different. So it's not even recognized by the body like it was before. So what's next? So the initial reason for the hybrid, this actually, I was just looking at this today and I found a flaw. One of the things said the 70s, but it was more in the 40s and 50s to increase the crop yield to end world hunger. And Norman did such a good job that he actually received the Nobel Prize in 1970 for his recognition to end world hunger. So what he did is he created a really, really great, stable grain that the human body had never seen before. So the human body's like, I don't know what you are. I'm not sure you're food. I'm going to attack you, and it's going to become inflammatory. The problem was that this GMO wheat today never really been tested on its effect on human consumption, so essentially we're the people being tested. The people being tested, this is the first generation, so to speak, that have actually been exposed to this type of food. So it's, you know, this is from, what's his name? Mark Hyman. Mark Hyman put this quote together for your good. So he's saying now we're seeing this explosion. Now the other thing is, wheat is not the cause of all problems in the world today, like some people say that it is. But it is a huge thing because we eat so much of it, and it's not a native grain to us. So now they're saying, now we're seeing all these different things. So this is actually the reality of Norman. He spent the first 10 years breeding wheat, and he, in that time, 6,000 crossings. And that would never happen in nature. You're never going to cross or hybridize a grain 6,000 times naturally. That would come over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years. So the human body would say, oh, you've changed this much, I can tolerate that. You've changed this much, I can tolerate that. Well, it changed by like football fields overnight. Okay. So his method would allow these different disease-resistant genes from several, this statement just kind of threw me for a loop. Genes from several different donor parents to be transferred into a single, that'd be like, my child has 6 dads, and somehow that's normal. There's nothing normal about that. So, it just goes on to show the hybridization of this wheat. So, then I went on to say, okay, well, how extensive is it? Well, India imported 18,000 tons of seed. Pakistan imported 42,000 tons of seed. Turkey, 21,000 tons of seed. Pakistan's planted on 1.5 million acres, enough wheat to seed the entire nation's wheatland for the following year, which had never before happened. So it's not like you're going to get away from it. Like, well, we'll just go to a different country where they don't do this. This is not everywhere. So there were such high yields that they had to close schools. They had to create new water sources. They had to build more trucks to import the wheat. So it was just a massive change. I just went on a little tangent here just to show you the massive change, the whole societal shift that this caused. So And again, this is just basically the change in consumption or production, the yields of wheat from 1950. And this was actually showing, oh, how wonderful it was. But look, it went from about between 500 to 1,000, all the way up to 5,000 kilograms per hectare. Just a massive change in how much wheat we could grow. The next one's more the same. So then, that kind of changes. That hopefully that gives you a little bit of background on why wheat is different today than it was. So you hear that argument a lot. Well, what's different today? Well, we ate wheat. My great-grandparents ate wheat. They didn't eat the wheat you're eating. And, you know, biblical times we broke bread. We didn't break this bread. You know, I have it's funny, the Catholic Church, when they give communion, has to have gluten in it by law. Right? Catholic law has to have gluten in it. So, because it has to be the same as it was in Jesus' time. Well, if you think the bread you're baking and breaking today has anything to do with the bread that was broken back in that time, you're sorely mistaken. We just showed you. There's no close. It's not even close. So, now the difference between gluten sensitivity and celiac disease, and I get this a lot. The only thing that gluten sensitivity is celiac sprue. I heard it 2 weeks ago from a patient who went to OBGYN. There's no such thing as gluten sensitivity. It's only celiac disease. Nothing could be further from the truth. And I will give you, hopefully, and I just took bits and pieces because I go off on tangents as well, but there's enough, hopefully, research in here to show you that there's a huge, huge, huge difference between gluten sensitivity and celiac disease. So this is out of focus because I stole it today. But this is gluten intolerance, and this is celiac disease. But gluten intolerance can lead to celiac disease, but it can lead to thyroid disease. It can lead to cancer, and it can lead to rheumatoid arthritis, and we know it can lead to osteoporosis. In fact, it's the most common cause of osteoporosis, research has told us. It can lead to fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue symptom. It can lead to any autoimmune disease or inflammatory condition, unrelated to the gut, unrelated to digestion. Okay. So this just talks about how you can have, actually skip this one, and then, well, this one's good, go back. This one. So the other thing we talk about is wheat has gliadin, which is what most of us think is gluten. But gliadin is this piece of the, so every grain has something called a prolamine in it. And that's like a piece of a protein, which your immune system can react to. And you see every grain, wheat, rye, oats, barley, millet, corn, rice, sorghum, they all have these in different percentages. So the most researched one is gliadin, which is 69% of it, and you see, well, rice is pretty neutral, it only has 5% of it, but you'll see, what you'll see is every single grain has these bits and pieces in it. So there's a lot of people that are very grain intolerant. They can't tolerate gluten, they can't tolerate corn, they can't, and they're like, what's the big deal? Guess what all these grains have gone through? They've gone through the same thing that wheat has gone through. All of them have gone through that. So it started with wheat, but now every grain. Why wouldn't you grow a better grain? Why wouldn't you make a hardier grain? Why wouldn't you make a wheat that could grow twice a year? Why wouldn't you make something that could grow in cold temperatures? So the other thing now, gluten intolerance can cause irritation to the gut lining, and cause tissue damage. And we'll talk a little about leaky gut here, I think. Go to the next slide. Yes. So leaky gut is different than gluten intolerance. But if you have an irritation or inflammation in the gut lining, and this is the gut lining, underneath the gut lining lies most of your immune system, which is great because we eat a lot of food, the food gets processed, comes into our body. As it comes into our body, you kind of want to have a border patrol there saying, you're okay, you're not okay, you're okay, you're not okay. So you have this tremendous 68% of your entire immune system is just behind your gut wall. It's called your GULT, your gut-associated lymphoid tissue. And so it's like your border patrol, and you want it there. And if you have a lot of irritation coming in, you've turned on your entire immune system. And if you turn on that immune system towards your own gut, you get celiac disease. But if you turn on that immune system towards your own thyroid, you get thyroid disease. If you turn that immune system onto your own brain, you get brain disorder, right? So, very common reaction is this gluten sensitivity sensitizes the immune system to something called a GAD65, GAD65, which causes your body to not make something called GABA, which is what we all use to calm down. So now I have gluten, I eat it, and I can't calm down, and I get hyperactive. And that's very, very well documented in the literature. So hyperactivity disorder. Then there's GAD. This same GAD65 is incredibly linked to autoimmune diabetes. You see it all the time. It's in all literature.
Chris, actually, how prevalent would you say leaky gut is? Just so that you get kind of an understanding.
Yeah, leaky gut. So leaky gut, good question here. So this thing, leaky gut or intestinal permeability, which has now hit the literature hard, because in the 70s it was kind of like, wow, it's kind of this quasi, it's not a real thing. Now it's in all the literature. It's everywhere, because now we can actually immunologically check and challenge for leaky gut through testing and prove that it exists. And they're working on a medication for leaky gut. And while maybe none of you have heard of leaky gut, as soon as the first drug is FDA approved for leaky gut, I promise you, every single one of you heard of it, because every single one of you treated for it. Because leaky gut is so prevalent that if you have any chronic condition, the probability of having leaking gut is 95%. So that's not anything to do with your stomach. That's any inflammatory condition, chronic illness, chronic fatigue, joint pain, osteoarthritis, upset stomach, anything. Because chronic inflammation drives the immune system, and the immune system tends to attack whatever's around it. What's around it? The gut. So we get irritation in leaky gut. And then we just drive that vicious cycle. So it's extremely prevalent in chronic inflammatory conditions. So think of how many people take medications for chronic issues. So we're not talking about antibiotics for strep throat. We're talking about antidepressants. We're talking about cholesterol medication. We're talking about sleep aids. We're talking about stomach issues. I mean, you talk about the top 10 drugs, they're almost all for chronic conditions. They're not for acute flares like antibiotics. This is just another blow-up, which sometimes we get into. These are the little cells in your body, in your gut, and they have little cilia or little hairs on them. Between them, right here, they're actually called tight junctions. Here's what it's called. They're called tight junctions. And they're held together by this molecule called a gluten. And then when it gets pulled apart, then you have a gap and things leak through. Now we can actually check in blood tests whether you have occludin antibodies, which means it's being pulled apart, and we can see that. Now, I spent a lot of times lecturing about leaky gut, but what's more concerning to me is this same molecular structure that's around your gut, and we talked about how prevalent leaky gut is, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people have it. Guess what else you have if you have leaky gut? Because the same structure holds true in the blood-brain barrier. So now you have leaky brain in the literature. So now you have stuff getting into your brain that's not supposed to get in there. And if you can cause inflammation in your body from this, what do you think is going to happen when you cause inflammation in the brain? Right? So, yes?
What does happen if you have inflammation in the brain?
Well, you can get things that cause disruption to the brain. So if you get inflammation in the brain, your body goes into a crisis mode. So you go into what I call running from the tiger, fight or flight. Mm-hmm. So if you're in fight or flight, you're not in rest and repair, feed and breathe. So your cycle can get off if you're a female. You may not sleep very well because you're in fight or flight. You may have digestive issues. You could have irregular heartbeat. You can have high blood pressure. You can have, I mean, it goes on and on. You can have depression, anxiety. You can have all the things that are affected when the brain is inflamed. So what happens when you have a concussion? Well, all the different things can happen. All those things can happen. What happens if you've had post-traumatic stress disorder? Mm-hmm. All those traumas that can happen. Anything can happen. So when you affect brain, you can have any kind of effect. You can affect memory. You can affect anything that regulates the system. Because when the brain doesn't work right, what doesn't work right? Everything. The brain controls everything. So now, we're not talking about like a massive stroke. We're talking about fractions of that. So if you just fractionate it out, you can have little bits of all these things. And so that's where it doesn't seem as obvious because things just aren't functioning quite right. Like I don't sleep well, I wake up at 5:30 or 4:30 in the morning. Well, it's not like you didn't sleep all night. Or I'm a little blue, or I don't feel as good, or I have a little constipation, then I get a little bit of diarrhea. Or I'm a little bit more irritable than I used to be, but I'm getting old. Whatever, all those types of things. So this is a slide from a different presentation I do just on leaky gut, but it's don't forget the autoimmune connection to leaky gut. So what we know is Leaky gut promotes autoimmunity, and autoimmunity induces leaky gut. It's a vicious cycle. If you have an autoimmune disease, you're going to have leaky gut. But what promotes the immune system to attack itself is when it's inflamed, which is promoted from leaky gut. So it's a vicious cycle. Okay, so if you have autoimmunity, you have leaky gut. And if you have leaky gut, you may not have autoimmunity, but you have an increased probability because you'll become more immune reactive. And when you become more immune reactive to self, you start to attack self.
So what you're saying is, in another way, is all the problems you just talked about, either from the brain or caused by leaky gut and so on, you wouldn't think the prevalence per capita prior to all this green change was
As prevalent?
Yeah.
Great question. So no, I don't think it was as prevalent. And we didn't have as much, forget about autism, we didn't have as much autoimmune disease, we didn't have as much cancer, we didn't have as much chronic issues, we didn't have as much depression, we didn't have as much sleep disorder, all the things we talked about didn't exist as much. So I don't want to blame just grains, because you know what else does it? The work schedule where you work 12-hour days. You know, there's a lot of things that do it, so it's not, but you're right. But we didn't see that nearly as much in years gone by. We also didn't live as long.
Well, you know, back in the day, people worked longer than 8 hours a day.
They did, but they worked. They didn't sit behind a computer like a lot of us did. They actually got out and physically worked. How do you turn down inflammatory processes sometimes? Physical activity. So, again, you look at a community like, say, an Amish community, you might not see it as much, but they're working. And they're also, they eat wheat, because somebody brought that up at a conference I was at, but they also eat real food. Right? They're not, but they move. So you might be working 12 hours a day, but you're working 12 hours a day. You're not drinking Diet Pepsi and Twinkie, which went out of business, thank God. But you're you know, I mean, you're working and you're actually, you know, you weren't exposing yourselves to a lot of things.
Yeah, so actually, you make a good point that I mean, it would be great to have this leaky gut drug, make things easier, but there are ways.
Yeah, there's protocols now that we use for leaky gut. There are protocols now, but I mean, the protocols, like,
So it would be a Band-Aid, basically.
well, no, we actually,
Okay, the drug would be a Band-Aid.
yeah, the drug would be a Band-Aid, but the good and the bad, the drug would make it a household name so everybody be aware of it and everybody be actually addressing it, where now you have to kind of seek these little niche little communities to try and figure out what is leaky gut. Like you said, my gastroenterologist, well, who would you go to for leaky gut? My GI doctor. He's never heard of it.
Well, you know what? We were just actually over at Hershey, Eating Disorders Department.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because she said, I gave her a lot of information. She said, oh, this is great. I really want to. So people, I think, want to learn about it, but it's not something that's a household name.
It's not, and so the good of the drug would be the drug would make it a household name. The bad of the drug would be a Band-Aid. It would never fix the cause because
Yeah,
they would
exactly.
say, I don't have to do anything about it. So, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. So, I threw this up because this is, you know, I'm trying to combat a lot of the arguments you may have heard or that come up. I have a gluten allergy. No, you don't. Because there's immunoglobulins, and I always call them the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines. You've heard me say this before, right? So there's the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines. So if the Army goes to war, an IgE, that's an allergy. But if the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines all go to war, it's not an allergy. It's not. So you can have IgG 100 times greater than it's supposed to be, and get hives, and get really sick. And if you go to an allergist, and your IgG isn't elevated at all, you don't have an allergy. You have nothing, because I only look at IgEs if I'm an allergist. And they're right, because by definition, this is what denotes an allergy. I have a son, I have 4 sons, and I have one son whose IgG to gluten is greater than 100, which means it's too high to measure. And they consider greater than 2 positive.
Wow.
So he's greater than 50 times the normal limit. He eats it, he breaks out hives. His ears turn bright red, he drools on himself, and can't talk. But he doesn't have an allergy, so I was told to feed him gluten. I was told not only by local allergists, I was told by Johns Hopkins. It's pretty hard to go gluten-free, so I just feed him gluten. His IgEs are negative. We choose not to. So it's important to know, because if you're having the conversation, and you get IgA, IgM, or IgG tested, and they're elevated, you do not have an allergy. You have an immune reaction. And that immune reaction may cause you to have multiple sclerosis, but you don't have an allergy. Because if you run around saying to my mom I have an allergy, it's one thing. But if you go to the doctor and you say, I have a gluten allergy, he's going to say, who told you that? That crazy guy in a cryo pack? You don't. Because your IgEs are negative. You got to know what he's talking about. They're right. You don't have an allergy. You can have a disruptive immune system, which may lead to chronic autoimmune disease and shorten your life and take years from your life, but you don't have an allergy, so don't worry about it. Okay? That's the truth.
Wow.
You don't have an allergy, but you can have a systemic inflammatory immune response. So what can cause leaky gut? I threw this in here because it's important, because it's not just gluten. Stress can lead to can lead to leaky gut. We know for a fact every time you have a concussion, you get a mild leaky brain, which causes a massive immune response, and the body tries to recover from it. Your diet certainly can do it. Well, that makes sense. Medications can do it. Infections can do it. Stress, hormones, trauma to the brain, and then metabolic. So autoimmune conditions can cause it, and it can cause autoimmune conditions. So, you know, if you look at this, how many people have a glass or two of wine a night? How many people are taking antacids or steroids or other drugs? How many people are under too much stress? How many people are on thyroid medication or hormone have hormone imbalances? And how many people have, this is a fancy word for diabetes. So how many people fit in that category? So you see how pervasive leaky gut can be, and leaky gut can lead to a lot of issues. This is a feed-forward cycle. So this is a breakdown of what really gluten is. So if you came to understand what gluten is when it comes to wheat, this is what it is, okay? Wheat has two portions of it, the protein portion and the carbohydrate portion. So it has the protein portion is called gluten, and gluten is broken into gliadin and glutenin, and then it's broken down to transglutaminase, and then it becomes deaminated, and it has different MERS. The lectin, which is the superior sprouted portion, but if you have a reaction to that, you can have a wheat germ gluten issue. And you can have a gluteomorphin issue, which is, gluteomorphin gets its name from gluten and morphine. It hits the opioid receptors in your brain, so when you get off gluten, you go through mild withdrawal. You get increased aches and pains. You're like, you're crazy, I got off gluten, everything got worse. And when you got off your heroin, you went through withdrawal. Like that, that's what you're saying. Yes, absolutely that can happen. Now, I got tested. My doc tested me for gluten, I'm fine. He checked tissue transglutaminase and alpha-GLAD. Is there anything else on his screen other than alpha and that? Yeah, there's a whole lot of things. Like this one causes asthma. Exercise-induced asthma. So this one causes you to have a chemical addiction. This one in the sprouted grains causes your blood cells to clump, and so you get cold hands, cold feet, hair falling out, all the thyroid symptoms. Right? All right, what's next? So, if you check and you test for it, this is how you, an exposure to gluten, you have an immune reaction, okay? If it doesn't involve your stomach or your gut, you're over here. It can cause tissue inflammation, the gluteomorphin reaction, which can lead to neurochemical imbalance, or it can trigger tissue autoantibodies, which means self-reactivity, to things like myelin, MS, cerebellar, gluten ataxia, parietal, gut, islet, diabetes, thyroid, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, cardioleptin, intrinsic factor blocking, vitamin D deficiency, anxiety, all those things, they're not made up. They're all in literature. And I pulled out just some for you to look at, to let you know that I'm not making it up. So then you can have stomach issues, and then if you have stomach issues but you don't have the gene, you have gluten non-celiac. If you have the gene and then you get a biopsy, you can have actual celiac disease. But you see how small a percentage celiac is of gluten sensitivity. There's a massive change. And I hear all the time, I bet you hear it every day. If you don't have celiac, you don't have gluten sensitivity. Nothing could be further from the truth.
So Chris, just some statistics, celiac's what, 1 to 2% general population?
Yes.
The rest is as high as 30%?
Or more, well, or more because of, if you go back to the leaky gut slide, right? The more people that are drinking alcohol, eating grains, taking drugs, necessary or not necessary, have hormone imbalances, have had a concussion, I mean, the more it promotes, and so it could be some people that are very aggressive with this say 1 in 4. Some people say 1 in 30. We know it's at least 133 because 133 in this country have celiac disease. So.
Last month on the Dr. Oz show, they had said 1 out of 10. Every
1 out
10
of 10?
people.
And if Dr. Oz is saying 1 out of 10, it's probably more. Because how many people are not getting tested? How many people don't know? And how many people say, how many people have autoimmune disease, chronic inflammatory conditions? I mean, it's going to lead to this, and it's never associated with it. You know, all of us know people. I'm fortunate to know a lot of people that have issues that they never, ever, ever would have associated with gluten. But gluten is absolutely a huge player in this. So this, I put this one up here because it's near and dear to my heart. This is me. So I'm making it up. It doesn't exist, right? Well, it's a condition. Wheat-dependent, exercise-induced anaphylaxis. Wheat eating. Is this new? Yeah, no, this is 2004.
Wow.
And I'm sure this isn't the first reference to it because this is, among wheat proteins, omega-5 gliadin has been reported as a major allergen in anaphylaxis. This is exercise-induced asthma by definition. So you have to have celiac disease to have a gluten sensitivity. Or if I go in the literature and search back as far as 2004, you can have exercise-induced asthma and no gut symptoms. Patients with disease of the intestinal tract represent only 1/3 of patients with neurologic manifestations from gluten. This is from 2002, Journal of Neurosurgery and Psychiatry. 2/3 of the people didn't have gut symptoms but had neurologic manifestations. Go ahead. So this is from 2006. Current ratio, 1 to 8. For every 1 we know about, there's 7 we don't know about. So this is work that shows that it's increased not just because we're better at detecting it, but also because there's so many undiagnosed. Also, undiagnosed gluten sensitivity may be associated with increased death. So this was an Air Force study. They took blood from Air Forcemen from 1947 to 1953, and they kept their blood. And what they did a 45-year follow-up and found that those that had gluten sensitivity had a 4-fold increased cause of all mortality. Not to do with the stomach, 4 times the incidence of death, increased rate of death. Okay. So this one is tied to the next slide. Associated autoimmune antibodies are frequent in gluten sensitivity in their first-degree relatives, spanning, so here we go. Endocrine, gastrointestinal, nuclear meaning the nucleus, which is every cell in your body, right, except for blood. Skeleton, neurologic, go ahead. So more specifically, antibodies against thyroid, endocrine, pancreas, gastric, liver, nucleus, reticulum, which is connective tissue, actin, smooth muscle, reticulum, desmin, collagen, bone, brain, ganglion, neuronal, blood vessels. What else do we leave out? So this, I'm not making this up. Like, this is from the literature, and it's not from my literature. It's not from, Carlisle Pike. I read it, wrote it in the back room. This is published, peer-reviewed literature. So when you have any one of these, and you don't know that you have gluten sensitivity, you're feeding this, and more importantly, how often are you being screened or checked for if you have some of that going on? Go ahead. So this, right, have to have celiac disease. The case of celiac disease mimicking ALS. What's the outcome of ALS? Good or good? Yeah, bad,
Really
right?
bad.
Guys in a wheelchair, you have ALS. You might have, at the most, 9 months to live. This, you don't have to be a neurologist. This is a brain. This big white thing right here, and right here, that's a lesion in the brain. That's Lou Gehrig's disease in the brain. Somebody happened to say, maybe we should check for gluten sensitivity. So, 2007, guy's in a wheelchair, goes gluten-free. 9 months later, he's out of his wheelchair. He's gotten better. 2 years after that, lesions are gone. Completely gone. Is that a rare outcome from ALS? Absolutely. You think, and this paper goes on to say, everybody diagnosed with ALS should be screened for gluten sensitivity. And I can tell you firsthand, people are not. And then when you bring it up to whomever, they think you're crazy, you're outside the box, you're a wackadoo, nothing, you're crazy. Like, where do you get this information? It should be screened. Anybody with a neurologic condition should first be screened for gluten sensitivity. This is pretty dramatic, right? This is documented. This isn't theory. This is, it saved the guy's life. And they didn't know what to call it, so they called it celiac of the brain. Because you have to have celiac in order to have gluten sensitivity. So, recent data shows that exposure to dietary gluten in offspring mothers, type 1 diabetes. So just going to go through, I'm just going to try and reiterate. Type 1 diabetes, nothing to do with the gut. Next. Demonstrate thyroid disorders. I mean, thyroid disorder, Hashimoto's is so well known that if you have Hashimoto's, now they're saying you need to be gluten-free. It's an independent test for gluten sensitivity. You have Hashimoto's, you have thyroid antibodies, you have gluten sensitivity. How do you know? Because there is such a strong correlation, I don't even need to run another test. That's how strong it is.
But didn't you say in a screen way back that when they test, they typically test, was it alpha and something else?
Tissue transcriptomics.
Well, I mean, how do you have to tell the doctor, well, you got to test for other things? I mean,
well,
is there a test that tests
there is a
that?
test. There's a test that tests, you know, the one I said, all those different ones
Yeah.
out there? No.
Yeah,
There's a
that's
test that tests for all these things. Yeah. It's an array. It's not covered by insurance because the only thing that's covered by insurance is a known pathogen, and you can't have a gluten sensitivity without having celiac disease. So it's not covered by insurance. The cost of the test is $325, right? And it tests for everything on that page.
And the test is considered by the literature to be...
Yes, the test is by a CLIA-approved, FDA-approved lab. That, now what you're going to get back, because I've gotten them back, and you send them, and they're like, you may have a doc that I don't believe that. Well, the numbers don't lie, right? The test is not, it's not a test I ran out of my garage. It's a test that's been CLIA-approved, FDA-approved, legitimate. They've gone through all the steps necessary. It's a legitimate lab. And so then it comes down to, what action you're going to take for yourself, right? If that test comes back positive, and you know the answer when that test comes back positive is yes, you want to address leaky gut, but stop eating gluten. So I say this talk is not a money producer; it's a free talk for the community. It just says this is what gluten can do. There's no financial interest in me saying go gluten-free. I don't have the gluten-free market. So this is just information, and it's refuted. Now, what is the downside to being gluten-free? What disease comes or what insufficiency comes when you don't eat gluten? None. So I don't know why there's such a resistance to it. If I'm wrong, which I'm not, if I'm wrong, and you don't eat gluten, nothing is going to happen negative. If I'm right and you continue to eat gluten, you can have any of those things we talked about, including Lou Gehrig's disease. So I don't know, I can't, for the life of me, understand why there's such resistance to this. Go ahead.
I am gluten-free, but I just recently was at my family doctor, and she said she couldn't test me for gluten sensitivity because I'm already gluten-free.
That's a great point.
Is that
So,
true?
Well, it depends how long you've been gluten-free,
Yeah, okay.
because what happens is when you eat gluten, you develop an army to gluten.
Okay.
And the longer you go without gluten, the slowly that army kind of weans down.
Okay.
The problem is if you cross-react, which a lot of people do. So say you develop a gluten sensitivity, but you also cross-react to your thyroid and Hashimoto's. You can get rid of the gluten, but you're not getting rid of your thyroid.
Okay.
Or if you're getting, whatever, if it's an autoimmune, means you have self-tissue you're reacting to. So the problem is, once you get the autoimmune reaction, it's very difficult. It's like going over the cliff. If you're here and I say take a step backwards, it's easy. But if you go over the cliff and now you're here, it's not just taking a step backwards. It's a lot of work to get you back to where you need to be. So you want to avoid anything that causes inflammatory response. But that's the downside. I had a patient. She was 62. She worked at Holy Spirit, and she had a lot of stomach issues as well as a lot of autoimmune issues. Went gluten-free, changed her life. She's good friends with a gastroenterologist. The gastroenterologist says, I got to be honest with you, I think you have gluten issues. I think you have celiac. But I can't diagnose it until you've eaten it for 6 weeks. We get a blood test. I get a tissue biopsy that shows you have villus atrophy. So she says, what do you think? I said, I can't in good faith tell you to eat it for 6 weeks. She said, I need the diagnosis for insurance purposes. She made it 2 weeks. She couldn't do it. She could not tolerate it. She tried it for 2 weeks. She couldn't even tolerate it. The doctor said, I know you have it. I can't by law diagnose you with it until I can do a tissue biopsy and show villus atrophy. I have another patient who is suffering from ALS, and he has been gluten-free for a while. So he doesn't have villus atrophy, these little hairs. They fold over and they're not real healthy, but he hasn't eaten it for 2 years. So Hershey Med said, villus atrophy, go ahead and eat it. His sister has celiac disease. He's got Lou Gehrig's. His mother has Hashimoto's thyroiditis. His father has MS. Go ahead and eat gluten? Like, what? Well, even if you don't have a gluten issue, man, don't go near this stuff.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
Quick question. Both my girls were diagnosed with severe acid reflux, okay, January. The way they were diagnosed, besides, gurgling stomachs, we did 2 separate upper GI. And at the same time, they questioned H. pylori.
Right.
What in the heck is H. pylori, and how does this tie into this whole thing?
So H. pylori is a good question. H. pylori is a bug that gets in your stomach, but not just your stomach, by the way, it can get anywhere in your intestines. And it's not always related to ulcers. It can be related to anything. But it's a bug that causes a chronic inflammatory condition and has been associated with ulcers. So the guy in Australia that figured this out was arguing for years with he's a medical doctor, and he was arguing for years that this was one of the causes of an ulcer.
Right.
So nobody believed him, so he did a scope, it was normal. Then he ate H. pylori, gave himself an ulcer, proved that it caused an ulcer. The problem was he didn't figure out how to get rid of it. So then he had to come up with, and he did, there's a triple antibiotic treatment for ulcers for H. pylori. But yeah, you see H. pylori a lot without ulcers. But H. pylori, think of it as like a bug in your stomach.
Well, no, because they did that, and I was the one that was the carrier. And they'd given me that triple antibiotic thing, and I was sicker with the triple antibiotic than I was with the H. pylori. So they said, don't worry about the H. pylori.
Well, and H. pylori, too, the best way to test for H. pylori, you drink this juice and you blow into a kazoo.
Never did it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's how you check for it.
Thank you.
So, oh, so here we're, psychiatric illness has been observed to be the main cause of disability in undiagnosed gluten sensitivity, right? Psychiatric illness, depressive psychopathology, keep going. This study results that suggest that gluten sensitivity or celiac disease included in this list of diseases associated with ADHD-like symptoms. Now, obviously, we're brain months, but ADHD,
Yep.
it's just, if you have it, I'll quote, so forgive me because I'm quoting, but I was at a research conference in California. And researchers do not have a lot of tact because they stick their heads in books all day long. And they're not biased. Well, they are biased, I guess, but they're just biased by the information they read. And they said, listen, if you have a child with a learning disability or ADHD and they're not gluten-free, you suck as a parent. That's exactly what they said.
Whoa.
They were that blunt. And they said, and if you're a practitioner and you don't get that message across, you need to quit. Like, that's how obvious.
Good Lord.
Yeah, I was pretty blunt, but, I mean, and it kind of hit us all like, that's not very cool to say that. You know, we're thinking about it, we're like, but it's kind of real. Like, the child doesn't make the choice.
Yeah.
The parents make the choice for us. So,
Yeah, but if you go to child psychiatrists, the first thing they're going to do is put your kid on Ritalin and say they have a lack of focus and concentration and try and do the whole.
Even if they do, because I'm trying to be politically correct, even
Yeah.
if they do that, right? That is, even if it's effective, that's a great short-term fix, but
Yeah, it
there's no
is. You're right.
long-term solution. So what happens if 3 years from now I take my kid off Ritalin?
Yeah, I know.
So I'm trying to be Switzerland, but it's becoming increasingly hard because those things may be effective, but you still need to look deeper at
Yeah.
mechanisms of what's going on so that you can reduce the chronic stress of the brain. Rheumatoid arthritis, we're found in 30, and by the way, this is testing that's not very good. So increased levels of anti-gliadin, this is the alpha-gliadin antibodies. One were found in 37% of rheumatoid arthritis. What if we checked all the other things? You'd find it in 100% prevention of patients. Go ahead. Migraine headaches. How often do you have a migraine or you're treated for migraines? How many people have had migraines or know people have migraines that have been checked for gluten sensitivity? Right? It should just be, you have migraines? It should be checked for. Yeah, and I tell this story too because I will have it up here. Is it a fad? Is it going to pass? Disney World, everywhere you can sit down and eat, even if it's just a little tiny one, everywhere you have a separate kitchen for gluten-free. It's not a fad. There's no Atkins separate kitchen. There's no Weight Watchers Point separate kitchen. There's a separate kitchen with a separate stove at every place you can sit down. So,
Have you seen Dow has a new gluten-free, they GMO to wheat plant? Make it-
that's gluten-free?
Yeah. So Dow is in, so it's real.
Dow Chemical? Yeah. If Dow Chemical's doing that, which kind of scares me that they gluten-free. Wheat. But no, like, yeah, people, this is not like, right, it's not wackadoos in Montana or us. I mean, it is, it's real stuff.
They've had, I think it's on YouTube, you can see the sun rising.
Yeah, Domino's didn't do it as a marketing point, you know, that kind of stuff. So yeah, good point. So gluten immunochemistry, I don't know why, oh, so this, again, these are the things that we want to look for. The protomorphins, the omega-gliadins, the alpha-gliadins, tissue transglutaminase, glutenin, gluteomorphins, wheat, GAD65, tissue transglutaminase. All of these are in that test I was telling you about. So this is what we're looking for. Not just alpha-gliadin and tissue transglutaminase. If you don't have these two, it's going to be missed in your standard test. If you go to your family doc and say, I want to be tested for gluten, they're going to test these two. And it's not their fault. They're not trained. I mean, this is fairly new, and it's difficult. It's not mainstream, so it's hard. It's hard to stand out. Go ahead. Yeah.
Good question. When you talked about buildup of antibodies, so if you go gluten-free and then, you know, Thanksgiving's coming up and you
Right.
want grandma's apple pie or whatever, so what happens when you fall off the wagon, I guess I'm saying?
Well,
like, I mean,
so-
how quickly does that build back up? Is it just?
It depends on, it's kind of like the sun thing I was telling you about. For some people, they'll eat it and they'll I had a patient once, she went gluten-free for almost a year, and then Thanksgiving came and she ate it, and she's like, I didn't feel too bad. Then she ate it at Christmas and she didn't get out of bed for a week. I've taken care of somebody who is, she ate gluten and they took the croutons off of her salad, but they didn't give her a new salad. She didn't get out for 17 days. She was out of commission. Like, how to work? Other people, you get a mild headache. Oh, I've been glutenized. I feel terrible. I have a gentleman that comes up from south of Gettysburg, and this should hit you home, right? So this guy, hard-working guy, owned his own company, did very well, built half the Gettysburg Hospital, right? And he said, you could have put a knife through him, and he wouldn't know the difference. He hurt that bad. He had been everywhere. He went down to Temple. There's a real prominent gastroenterologist there. They cut all the nerves off of his stomach. They thought that was it. They did everything. So, his words, not mine. 30 years, 50 doctors, 239 doses of medication, zero help. 3 days gluten-free, pain-free. He had the money and the means to go to, and he did. He went everywhere and anywhere to find out what the answer was. He went into his gastroenterologist last time. He had pneumonia. And as he's leaving, he said to her, I think this will be the last time I see you. And she said, why? He goes, I'm dying. I think I'm going to die. And so as he's leaving, almost as a sarcastic joke, she said, that Hasselback lady said, go gluten-free, why don't you try that? 3 days later, he was pain-free. 3 days. And he was pain-free. When he saw me, he still wasn't healthy yet. I'm like, so there's a lot more to it. But that, I don't even know how I got in there. What was your question?
Oh, what if you have?
Oh, what if you fall off the wagon? So, so when he gets glutenized, he gets the pain back like that. It's an accidental exposure. Some people eat it and they feel like, oh, my glands, I'm not feeling myself, or some people eat it and they're like, I'm just a little foggy brain. So it really depends on you. It does depend on you. But I don't have it in the research in here. It takes less than a pinhead of gluten, because again, you can't sit still. If you're on the edge of a table, if it's that last step to knock you off, so it takes less than a pinhead of gluten to cause an irreversible autoimmune consequence. At times, some people eat it and get away with it for a long period of time. So, I can't answer that, other than it's like playing with fire.
You say the longer you're off, the more intense the consequences?
A lot of people do notice. So the longer you're, like when you're eating, you're like, it wasn't that bad, I didn't feel good, but then all of a sudden you're off it for 2 years, you eat it, and it just knocks you down like a ton of bricks all of a sudden, because like, all those antibodies just come rushing back with a rage. So yeah, and some people get away with one exposure, and the second exposure, they're down and out. It's almost like a false, I could do this. But a lot of times we'll hear that. Now, the argument always was, well, you were always felt that bad, but now you're healthy. Well, that's not true, because people get knocked out harder than before they went gluten-free. So,
Yeah. How long should you be grain-free when you're trying to heal the leaky gut?
well, that depends on you, right? Okay. So if you've had issues for 30 years, you're going to have to be grain-free longer than the person who had a concussion last week and developed leaky gut, and they can recover quickly. And it also depends on how much can you recover. So if you're like that person that is genetically blessed and just can do whatever and go out in the sun for 2 days with, not get sunburn, you might have a concussion and relatively quickly recover. But if you're not, it may be you have a concussion and you get to eat grains, you never recover from leaky gut. So you constantly fight the battle.
Yeah, Chris, I might be able to address your question, because again, with my 15-year-old, we started her October 1st. She's been gluten-free, dairy-free, and everything. If she gets cross-contaminated, she knows it immediately.
Oh, yeah.
She has just picked up on that sensitivity very quickly.
I have patients who don't know. They're like, I had a patient today, she's like, I don't feel any better gluten-free. Her numbers are through the roof. She's like, I guess I'll keep doing it, but I don't feel any better. Should I keep doing it? I'm like, yes. Because I don't want to wait till you have this. I have another patient, if she has a glass of wine, the first sip, she's like, that had gluten in it. And she's dead on. She's dead on. She'll tell you, I can't have that one. Other ones she'll have, it's dead on. She could tell you, so vodka can come from any grain, or anything can come from wood. So she can tell you if it came from a grain that had gluten in it. And they'll tell you that vodka is gluten-free. State Store is technically gluten-free, but not to her, because she can tell you wines and other alcohols that have been distilled from grains. So these are the only two things they check for: alpha-gliadin antibodies and tissue transglutaminase. So we've shown you that there's a whole lot more things to look for. Go ahead. Sorry. We need to check for all these things. So go to the next one. So this, it's hard to see, but this was a test done by a world-renowned immunologist. And what he did, and I didn't put them all on here because you guys have been bored, but this is migraine headaches. Here's your alpha-gliadin, and here's your tissue transglutaminase. So if you come to me and I'm General Joe, they actually do the Murphy. So I check this one, and I check this one. You don't have anything wrong with you. But we see that these are just a wee bit of anything over this dotted line is out of range. These two are just slightly out of range. And we'll go back. And so why would this be to a headache? Well, look. Gluteomorphins and protomorphins, both opioid receptors, both pain reducers when you eat it. And when you get off of it, you have rebound pain. So migraine headache, if you're not asking those questions, you're not going to get the answer. And the answer is going to be, that has nothing to do with it. That guy's nuts. So, go ahead. Try that again. That's what I'm going to check again. Go ahead. You're going the wrong way. You're going the wrong way. This is, I didn't put, there's I don't know how many of these he did. Patients with gluten sensitivity and normal gut. So this is, they do a tissue biopsy and they're normal. Look at all this stuff out of range. So if we use the tissue biopsy alone, and we say, oh, that's all we need to check, that's the gold standard, everything else is out of range. So this is Crohn's disease. Crohn's disease, because Crohn's is another autoimmune disease just like celiac. So, but Crohn's, the MER33 is low, and the tissue transglutaminase is the IgG is out of range, but barely. So, but look at the last two over here and this. They're massively out of range. Okay. This is inflammatory bowel disease. Inflammatory bowel has nothing to do with what you're eating. So, your alpha, your GLAD 30, right.
And many things to do with
No,
that.
couldn't have anything to do with that. So tissue transglutaminase and alpha GLAD, they're low. This is, I'm going to say, slightly elevated. A little bit out of range. Go ahead. So rheumatoid arthritis, right? Rheumatoid arthritis has nothing to do with gluten because my alpha 33 is low, my tissue transglutaminase is low. Again, wheat germ agglutinin, and wheat germ agglutinin is the safer sprouted superior one. So I'm safe because I eat sprouted grains. Yeah? Really? That's telling me you're a bit high. So today, because I just decided, I was like, I wonder what's recent. So this is before the publication. So this is December 2012. Effectiveness of nutritional interventions on functioning of children with ADD, ADHD, or Asperger's, an updated review. I didn't put the whole thing in there, but this is talking about nutritional interventions, mostly gluten, for ADD, ADHD, and Asperger's. Go ahead.
Are you saying then that there's a correlation between certain diseases and those one or two of those specific things? Has that ever been done, or could it be any?
It could be any, but that's what we're getting to. Like we can say now that omega gliadin is correlative to exercise-induced asthma. The problem with the other ones is, if we cause an inflammatory cascade, what's your weak link? So we can check for ANSA and ANSA antibodies for Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. That just means if you're going to get an immune reaction to self, what's most likely to happen? So I barrage you with anything inflammatory, what tissue gets affected. So it's hard because it really comes down to what your weak link is. So the effectiveness of gluten-free, casein-free diet for children diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders based on parental report. This is, again, 2012, this year. We're going. Non-celiac wheat sensitivity, which some people still tell me you cannot have non-celiac wheat sensitivity. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing. But it's in the literature. It's in that crazy journal, that wacky, Journal of Gastroenterology, yeah, the mainstream one, American Journal of Gastroenterology. So it's there. Again, I would say to your gastroenterologist, this is your, not politely, respectfully, this is your journal. This is your journal. The one that you're supposed to read. The American Journal of Gastroenterology, 2012. Put your head in a journal, right? Non-celiac. Gluten sensitivity, problems of an emerging condition separate from celiac disease. There you go. 2012. Lymphoma and celiac. That's cancer. Right? Downside of going gluten-free is?
Nothing.
Maybe a few bucks. Downside of eating gluten?
Everything.
Lou Gehrig's, lymphoma. So I put this one here, movement disorders in autoimmune diseases, and I just threw it in there because of all the things, and this is kind of goofy, they're saying gluten sensitivity. Well, gluten sensitivity can cause all these things. Pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorders. I mean, it's in the literature. This is that old journal from 2012. Next. Gluten-related disorders and demyelinating diseases. Okay? This is September 2012. They may be associated with other autoimmune diseases such as multiple sclerosis and neuromyelitis. Gluten-related disorders are a spectrum of systemic immune-mediated conditions that can occur at any age in genetically susceptible individuals upon ingesting gluten. I eat gluten, I can get an autoimmune disease. I'm not drawing too many big bridges here, right? I'm not jumping over the Grand Canyon. I'm taking baby steps. It's all in the literature. Yeah.
Have they done any research regarding Parkinson's or Alzheimer's?
Absolutely. It's a neuroinflammatory condition. Yeah.
Alzheimer's?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gluten sensitivity problems. Where did that? You're going backwards.
Are you sure?
No, I may have put it in twice. Celiac disease, wheat allergy, and gluten sensitivity. When gluten-free is not a fad. This is from 2012, January 2000. So I hear it all the time. It's not a fad. I had a patient come in. She's 15 years old. She came in. I worked her up. I said, "There's nothing wrong with her. I'd like to work some blood work up on her." Massive gluten intolerance. Her joints hurt everywhere. I know the family. I said, "Listen, it's a gluten. I think she's got a gluten issue." He said, one daughter's in college and she's going to be a nutritionist. She thinks it's a fad." And I said, it's not. Like, your daughter's suffering. She's 15 years old. I know what this can do. And I said, I'm just going to tell you. Bring her back when she has an irreversible autoimmune disease. I don't know what else to tell you. Like, I don't know how else to. I mean, it's hard for me because I have a big heart and a heavy heart. I'm like, I'm not asking you to move heaven and earth. Go ahead.
So what do you look for on a package? Like you said, soy sauce has gluten in it. What
Well,
does
that says
mean?
wheat, contains wheat.
Okay.
I mean, I said soy sauce is one that you wouldn't think because it's
Right, well, that's
soy.
what I meant. So
But you
look
flip it
for-
around, and it's one of the ingredients is wheat in there.
Okay.
So hidden sources, and hidden sources, caramel color, right? That's one most people think of. Caramel color, shampoo. Well, a lot of topicals have it on, but caramel color. Then you have anything like
Natural flavor?
natural flavoring. Natural flavoring can be gluten.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like on a lot of meats, they don't have to label it because if it's under a certain percentage, they don't have to tell you that gluten's even in there. So the safest thing is gluten-free. And gluten-free, by definition, gluten-free means that the substance can't come from a gluten-containing grain, and it needs to be less than 20 parts per million in this country. In Canada, it's 5 parts per million only because when they got around to doing it, the technology was better, but any kind of natural flavorings, artificial flavorings, flavor enhancers, caramel color.
So any additives really are
Any
like a
additives.
red flag.
Maltodextrin from a domestic source is corn. Maltodextrin anywhere outside the United States can be from wheat. They're the big ones. They're the big ones. There's malt flavoring,
Barley malt,
barley malt.
barley,
Yeah.
barley, rye.
Yeah.
Now, if you're looking at packages and they'll say like it's made with like rice flour, like they take out the wheat flour, but they'll make it with, rice flour, or I've seen ones made with corn flour is a big one, or even beans. Is there one that's better than the other, or?
So that gets a little bit deeper down the rabbit hole, so to speak, because there's wheat, but then you can have grain sensitivity, and then beans are high in what they call lectins, which are immunoreactive. So, I mean, that's why we usually start patients off on a really horrible diet, which is pretty restrictive for 4 weeks, because you can't eat any beans, any nuts, any seeds, any grains, any dairy, any eggs. So, because we want to take out anything that's immune reactive. So, of the grains, in my opinion, and I'm right, are the most offensive. The grains are the worst. And then you go from there, you can go, well, grains and dairy, because they kind of they're married. And then you can go to like beans and nuts and seeds. So, yeah.
Have you designed a new pyramid then?
My food pyramid?
Yes.
I hate such a strong word, but I don't want to throw it in like the paleo diet, but the paleo diet, like if you can pick it and you can kill it, you can eat it.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, honestly, there's something I didn't put on here, but it was before we were cultivators, we averaged 200 to 300 species of different things we ate, and now that we're cultivators, we average like 20. So we just kind of eat what we grow every day, and so honestly, the safest thing to eat is meats, fruits, vegetables, and coconut, with the exception of nightshades. So no tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, and eggplants. I mean, that's kind of it. You're looking at me with I'm just telling you. If you had Lou Gehrig's disease, I would say this is what you're going to eat. If that's your best chance.
Can you say it one more time?
Meats, fruits, vegetables, and coconut with no nightshades. So oversimplified, tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, and eggplants. So, again, I mean, those are all, and then there's, and this is honestly going to kind of quiz yourself. If you say, I'll starve to death, then you're not eating meats, fruits, vegetables, and coconut. I mean, then you're not eating, then typically they're the ones coming in saying, I don't feel good. So, yeah, the grains, the refined foods, and it can be, there's a condition where, especially in children, where they can't tolerate any grains, even rice. But I mean, you know, if you're around long enough, we had a little kiddo come in here, didn't go through the program, but we ran the blood test on him. He was gluten sensitive. He had 32 cousins, large Irish Catholic family, and 3 of the children in that family were diagnosed with failure to thrive. They were shorter and smaller in stature than the 6-year-olds, or than the 3-year-olds, and they were 6-year-old. The whole cousin level, whatever, all went gluten-free. Everyone improved, and all the children with failure to thrive no longer had failure to thrive. I mean, that's a dramatic case. We had a child from Reading come in. The children and youth were ready to take the child because he was failure to thrive and wasn't eating. We took him gluten-free. I had to argue with the pediatrician because you can imagine a child failure to thrive said, don't eat food. Like, what is wrong with that guy, right? Went gluten-free within 2 months, no longer diagnosed failure to thrive. I mean, it happens all the time. So it's you know, it's a big deal to me, and Aaron can tell you I catch a lot of flack from a lot of people, but there's no downside other than a few extra dollars. I mean, there's no real inconvenient, but health-wise, you're not going to get deficient in a vitamin or a nutrient from going gluten-free. So, and honestly, for a lot of people, they've tried everything, and it's not helping, and this is just, this should be one of the things, if not the first thing, at least should be on the list of the differential. And if you have the 2 tests done, and you think you're negative, that's almost false ammunition because I was tested so I can eat it, so I'm not even going to revisit it. So, yeah.
If you were to go gluten-free and you were on a bunch of medications, would you somehow be overdosing yourself with your medications?
Well, that depends. I mean, that's the frustration too. Is we don't want to be an island. We want to be the team. So hey, we're going to go gluten-free. I'm on a blood pressure medication. Now I'm getting dizzy because my blood pressure is 70/40. Well, maybe that had an effect, But those are things that are those are the things that need to be worked in the healthcare community. But the healthcare community. It would be nice if the healthcare community was part of the team. So it wasn't like, it's not this or this, it's this and this. It's worked together as opposed to being the outlier or the outcast in mainstream medicine. They can work very well together. Yes?
What is your opinion or feeling on gluten-free makeup? Women wearing makeup, does it have to be gluten-free?
The question was gluten-free makeup. It depends on you. Some people cannot tolerate gluten-free or gluten anywhere in their body. And other people, again, it's how quickly you're going to get sunburn outside. Some people can tolerate it and other people can't. It really just depends.
Is there any, skin absorption?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. They're absolutely. I mean, because the second you say, that's a bunch of hooey. You're going to get somebody saying, really? Because I live it. Crawl inside my body for a second. And let me tell you, it is. Like the woman who has a glass of wine that says gluten-free. She says, it's not gluten-free. I'm telling you. I don't need a test. Save your money. I can tell you. So, you learn to respect. Like I always say, I work for the patient. The patient doesn't work for me. If you come in and you say to me, I use shampoo, and it bothers me, and there's gluten in it, I'm going to say, you know what? Don't use it. I mean, that absolutely. I'm not going to say, well, science hasn't caught up with you yet, so therefore science must be right. So I don't know.
Do you know of any gluten-free makeups or?
Arbonne is all gluten-free.
We're actually having a gluten-free cookie exchange here at the center on December 4th from 6 to 7:30, and Perfectly Posh is going to be here as well, and they're going to be selling and letting you sample, but they're all natural skincare and gluten-free skincare products. So if you want to come. December 4th, from 6 to 7:30. You have to bring 2.5 dozen gluten-free cookies. Half a dozen that we're gonna eat, and then 2 dozen for you to take home, and then you get to bring your cookie tin, and you can go home with the whole assortment.
Are they just gluten-free or gluten-free, dairy-free?
We're gonna have a mix.
Okay.
Yeah, so just label ingredients, because I know some people are not free to. And
that brings a great point. So we had a mom who, she's the most, food-wise, she's the most remarkable, but son is gluten-free, has to be gluten-free, dairy-free, sesame-free, soy-free, corn-free, and they electively choose to be vegan, which means they don't eat anything from, and they do it, and they do it. And their child was on the spectrum and is now no longer on the spectrum.